year. At this point, it's probably, the end of January. You're probably sick and tired of being reminded it's a new year because, those New Year's resolutions are probably gone away by now. It's okay. Mine too. I don't make them for that purpose. Welcome back to Call to the Table. I'm Olivia, and I'm constantly annoyed by John.
And I'm John. I constantly annoy Olivia.
And I'm Jordan. I'm constantly annoying Caroline.
And I'm Caroline. I try not to annoy people. Because I hate conflict.
If you notice, I don't annoy anybody.
Oh, really?
Nobody said I annoy them.
It's understood that you annoy everybody, Olivia.
Oh!
And we love you for it anyways.
Liv has died. Alright. Today we are talking about the purpose of church. And
I have opinions.
We're gonna do what?
I have opinions.
We're gonna take it back first and talk about what the original purpose of the church church
Don't have
was
opinions
supposed to
about
be.
this one.
I do.
Go for it.
I have notes.
Okay.
The note taker.
History was not my thing.
You guys need to stop laughing every time I do that because I'm just going to say that. I have notes. So,
funny.
The original purpose of the church when it was established. So, oh wow, I forgot. This one was big. What has worship of God looked like throughout the ages? So we've got within the garden, walking and talking with God in person. Then we have outside the garden. It was the altar before the garden entrance. Up until Moses, it was still altars. After Moses, we have the sanctuary, which was to give God a physical place to interact with his people, as well as a way to further explain the plan of salvation. Then we have the temples, and I say temples plural because we have them being destroyed over and over and over again.
Yay!
And that was a formal, permanent place that stood as a monument to God. It was a place that was supposed to show the world who God was, where people from other nations could gather, because Israel just happens to be located in like the very middle of those routes that were taken throughout the Middle East, so that way God's message of love and acceptance could be distributed throughout the whole ancient world. But, of course, things go awry. And then outside of the temples, we also had the formal schools, which were like the churches of today in that they read the Bible, they discussed how these things applied to their lives, they brought up the children, they had all of those rituals which pertain to different parts of growing up. So that's what the church looked like within the Old Testament, getting into the New Testament. And then we've got one of the big differences between the Old Church versus the New Testament church is we've got a greater emphasis on conversion and proselytizing, which, I mean, yes, we did have that in the older church, but it was more like we're fighting for our place in this world so that way we don't lose what we have already. But now that we have the Messiah who has already come and fulfilled all of those things, we want to tell people about it. We are no longer bound to this one little place.
First the Jew, then to the Gentile.
Exactly. So it's a much greater emphasis, like I said, during the Christian church versus during the Jewish church. And I put all of those with big quotations because, I mean, there was not supposed to be that big of a difference. Why are you...
Put your feet over there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Okay,
Jordan kept hitting my foot, and I was like, what's going on?
It's called communication, ladies.
I mean, church... I mean, even with the older church, it was still a community. But particularly during the just early New Testament, during the very early church, we have huge emphasis on it being a community, particularly because we have all of these new believers who are looking for a refuge from the world. People were helped with no strings attached. It was a center of education, and they were trying to go for that true community with, I don't want to say no boundaries, but you know what I mean. They were open and honest with each other. It was also an attempt to radically replicate the kingdom of heaven on earth. I mean, they were going out there and going to literally every corner of the world because they wanted Jesus to come back now. They had already been with him in the flesh. They're like, he's going to come again? Great, let's make that happen as freaking fast as possible, And so they were just going to bulldoze their way through the rest of the world so that way they could have Christ's message go everywhere and Jesus could go on and hurry up coming back home during their lifetime, of course. it's terrible when they realize that's not gonna happen, particularly for, I feel bad for John. There he is on lonely Patmos, and Jesus is like, yeah, it's gonna take me a little longer than that, because we've got a lot of things happening, prophetically, and John's like, I'm glad I got to see you, but it stinks that I'm gonna have to die, but, your time is different from our time. So, anyway.
Dang it, I die!
And then he gets to heaven and is like, oh, there you are, Jesus! You get to see him. It's good. It's all good.
Okay, there's my rant.
Point
1.
I took it from the Acts church. I feel like because the stuff that was in the Old Testament was wiped away when Jesus came. So I took it from the Acts church, which is what we have kind of branched off. All the churches now have branched off of that Acts church. And every time I read about the Acts church, I read it as it was, and this is going to sound militaristic, and I'm not meaning that, but it was a training. They were going and they were training these churches how to not only talk about the gospel, but walk in the gospel. Mm-hmm. And Paul and Peter and Timothy and all of them kept each other in check. When their walk did not match the talk, they got yelled at by one of the other ones. And, Paul writes to so many different churches and says, you're sitting here and you're preaching the gospel, but yet you're adding your own stuff into it. You're not walking that walk. And so I feel like the original Acts church, it was a community like you touched on, Caroline, but the whole point of the community was to get people to have their walk and their talk in line and then send them out so that it was spreading even further. That was the whole thing, is they, like you said, they wanted God to come back as soon as possible. How are you going to do that? You're going to get more people who are going to go out and do that. So it was a training ground almost of, getting people to do that.
The beautiful thing is the time that this all happened was during the time that the Roman Empire was the empire was just created. Went from the Republic to the Empire about that time. Because... Okay, your Imperial March. Meow, meow, meow.
You ruined it.
Yep.
Well,
anyway.
You were a chicken, so...
Yeah.
And I was going for the cat going to kill the chicken.
You're so mean. Chickens are good.
Anyways.
Chick-fil-A. Close on Sunday.
He's trying to...
You're my Chick-fil-A. I love Kanye's new album, okay? Okay, anyway, sorry.
But this allowed for the spread of it to actually happen at that pace. Because, yes, the roads were still dangerous, but they weren't extremely dangerous. And in the Roman Empire, they accepted multiple religions because they were the first melting pot of the world.
Yeah.
Let's just, the Jewish people put up such a great fight. They were able to keep a king of Israel
still a
within
figurehead, but yeah.
a figurehead, along with a Roman governor, side by side, essentially, ruling within the Roman Empire. But, that being said, they were also very much persecuted, which is where actually the term Christian came from.
Yeah.
They called the people who were in the Colosseum being devoured by the lions and tigers and bears, oh my,
I
Christians.
knew you were going to go with that.
My joke was better. My Star Wars joke was better. Nice try. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, well, anyways, but the purpose of it, though, was to not only train and send out, but to build the community, to take care of the poor and the widows, which were specific charges during that time. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just a building, it was a community, whether it be at one person's house or in a synagogue.
Yeah, because they didn't have true buildings.
Because they were being persecuted.
I was really bad at history, so I don't really have anything to contribute. Just so everyone knows, that's why I'm quiet. I was bad at history. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait till we talk about the current church. Then I'll have stuff to say.
All right, Alyssa, you can kick us off.
Oh, we're already on that.
What has caused there to be a change between what we all talked about, because we gave you a history lesson. Hey, what has caused the change between then and now?
Well, first off, I don't believe that. And first off, let me preface this. with my opinions are my opinions, and I'm going to share my opinions, and that they do
They
not
are
have to
your
be,
opinions.
Yeah, they do not have to be agreed upon, but I'm going to share them whether they are agreed with or not. One of the things that I think that has changed is the church itself has begun to be a little bit more political than it's necessary.
Oh, I believe in that.
And I also think the sense of community is completely lost.
Oh, yes.
I do not agree that churches are communities. And this doesn't apply to all, but this applies to most that I've seen. In my opinion, I think most churches no longer support the community aspect. I also don't think that the church, a lot of churches are following through with the bride meeting,
Bridegroom.
the bridegroom. I think that is completely off in many churches because of the political aspect of things. We need to be politically correct. We need to follow suit. We need to go with these traditions and make sure that we're following through. But then we're also not addressing the fact that this is a community, and at first a church was to be a vessel of community and a vessel of people and a vessel of like-minded Christians coming together, being fed, being brought in, send them out, and spread the gospel. We got church who's preaching about community, and the church is supposed to be not about the building, but the actual people inside the building, right? Right. So we're now in a situation where the church is feeling so attacked and so against their beliefs, that they're pushing their traditions and their beliefs further on people, so we're losing sight of that community and that that original reason we have the church. And we're seeing smaller home churches pop up to gain that community because of what the church is doing. Does that make sense? That's my opinion.
So you're seeing kind of a balance yin-yang effect.
Yes.
The big churches are going further and further in a downward spiral.
Yeah.
To combat this,
Yeah.
smaller groups of people make small churches.
Yeah, at their homes. They're going back to the real reason we had churches in the first place, is to build up people to spread them out. I mean, you look at these mega churches, and not all of them are bad, and I know that not all of them are bad, but you look at these mega churches that have the $1,000+ of lighting equipment. They have the amazing sound equipment. They have amazing instruments. They have amazing facilities. They have the big screens that have all the words on them, and you've got the worshipers jumping up and down like it's a rock concert. That's not worship to me. To me,
I agree.
that is a concert. That is
Yes.
ridiculous. I don't need to be
Yes.
sitting here and thinking to myself, am I worshiping, or am I worshiping the people who are pretending to worship?
Mm-hmm.
What am I, where am I? Because a worship leader should be issuing in the Holy Spirit, not creating a huge concert. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And then we've got these small little churches, I'm going to give a huge shout out right now to my kiddos. They've got a group in a community called the Living Room. And they literally meet in their living room and worship. They get their guitars out, they get their, their instruments, and it doesn't matter what they, sound like, it doesn't matter what they bring to the table, they just worship.
It says make a joyful noise. It said nothing about it being good.
And they're actually fantastic singers, let me just say that. But then they're like, we need another element. So they invited me to come and lead the girls' Bible study. And I do it when I can, because I am quite busy and it's really difficult sometimes. But I come in and they've created their own church. They've created their own community that is moving forward and being progressive in the church. Mm-hmm. Why are we not doing that with the church itself? That's where I think the biggest shift is this sense of community is lost. I also think money has gotten into the mix of it. I've noticed a lot of churches that talk more about money than they do about the actual Bible.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Now, I'm all about this whole January, start the new fiscal year with the church, reintroducing the idea of giving and reintroducing the idea of money in the church. But if that's all you talk about from January to December, except for Easter and Christmas, we got an issue.
Yeah, that's not a church.
If you're going to push
That's a
tithing...
business.
That's prosperity gospel.
Yeah. And if you're going to push tithing, I understand tithing, and I totally agree with tithing, and I am, I do what I can. But what if you can't do that? Like, what if you're in a situation where you fiscally could not tithe? Like, I know you're supposed to give 10% of your check, but what if that 10% is your groceries? You know what I mean? Like, what if that season of your life, that 10% is literally the food that you have to put on your table?
I'm going to agree to disagree on this because I do believe that God does provide if you're faithful to Him. But
I absolutely agree with you
I
on
can
that.
still understand that, but to me, that is an act of faith giving to God rather than focusing on the fact that that money is going to a church.
Right. And I completely, like, I see your side and your point on that. But then say, what if God has not called you to a church? What if God has said, you know what, I want you to spend this time reflecting on your relationship with just me? Then what do you do with your tithe?
That's a good question, and I guess because I've never actually been in that situation before.
Yeah.
I don't know where I would put that 10%, but I would still want to give that 10%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it goes back to what the main purpose of the church is. Well, it's to either build and send out people to spread the word, or to help your community through the poor and through the widows. And this is the only time God tells us to challenge Him is in our giving.
Yeah.
Yes.
That we cannot outgive Him.
Right.
And so instead of, if you're not in a church, instead of donating it to the church, you might go to the Salvation Army.
Absolutely.
You might take it to a homeless ministry. You
Yeah.
might take it to anywhere. You might even go out and buy stuff and give out food to the homeless yourself.
Right.
These are all things that you could do instead. And I've actually had this conversation with somebody before. They're like, I'm not in the church. I don't believe in giving to the church because I'm not in one. But instead of taking that money and giving it to the church, I'm going out and giving it to
Absolutely.
this. I'm like, that works.
Absolutely. And that's where I sit in, that's where I was in Houston. It was like, I don't have the financial ability to tithe. I was literally living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck in any sense that I could and working extra hours. I also didn't go to a church my whole 4 years. I tried a couple here and there, but I never found a church because God was like, your relationship with me is about your relationship with me. My money went towards Adeum. My tithing went towards an organization that at the time I believed in. I believed in the outreach, and I then donated monthly to Adeum, and I paid for certain things, and I made sure that I supported other people. Maybe it was taking care of someone's tuition that month, or maybe it was, doing X, Y, and Z. But I definitely, and I agree, I think there's other ways that you can tithe. But it's one of those things where it's like, if the church is acting a little too much about the money and I don't feel easy about it, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to give to that church, because if I have an uneasy feeling, and this is going to spark a whole debate, and if anyone out there disagrees, I'm sorry. There is not any part of me that would give to the Joel Osteen Church.
Oh, honey, amen.
Period.
Amen.
Yeah.
I don't agree with anything he does. I don't agree with him. He's in Houston.
He's prosperity gospel.
It's ridiculous. And I have family members and I have friends out in Houston who would be like, well, why don't you just tithe to Joel Osteen? I'm like, no, not happening. Anyway, I don't tithe to him. I wouldn't tithe to him if that was the church that I chose, but that's also not the church I would choose.
Well, for me, I'm going to go more on a history lesson like Caroline did with initially. I believe where the church really started turning was when it finally organized itself into a one-banner church. Instead of it being the Church of Athens, the Church of Rome, the Church of Antioch.
Are we... Okay, we can edit this part out. Are we going to be talking about Catholicism now?
I want to hit that point.
I mean, I don't...
I want to talk about how the start of the Catholic Church started.
I'm not okay with Catholicism. I just don't want people who might be Catholic to be listening to this and be like, oh, they hate Catholics.
Well, I grew up in a half Catholic and half Baptist church.
Right.
So I can vouch for the other side of things, being half growing up in a Catholic household.
Okay.
Where I don't agree with everything that the Catholics do, and they make it very known, but I appreciate what they've done because it's a part of my heritage.
Because, I'm not talking about Catholics or even individual
the church
sects or whatever. I'm talking about the historic church itself and what the very, very higher ups have done.
Yeah.
Which has had lasting impacts on generations.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think if you touched on that, I can definitely not counter it, but
yeah,
bring up some positive.
Balance.
Yeah.
Okay, go John.
And the first major church like this was the Byzantine Church, which was after the fall of the Roman Empire, after it split itself into East and West, and the West finally crumpled away, and it was just the Eastern Roman Empire, which then renamed itself. And they centered themselves in Constantinople or Byzantine, depending on what time and period you're looking at, and they had 5 heads of the church. One there, one in Rome, one somewhere in Africa, one up near Russia, and one that was further east.
One that was blessing the rains down in Africa.
But during this, they had conflict even within their church of who exactly was Jesus. Whether that was an all-man, all-spirit, half-man, half-spirit, and they had to come together and they had to come to an agreement as a church. And they actually banished believers of God based off of these beliefs.
There's part of your problem.
Well, and it was very much a Jesus was a prophet type of belief.
Yeah. I still don't think you should ban... I mean, if people are, like, straight up... When I say causing trouble, I mean disrupting people's lives, going out of their way to, like, make people miserable. That's when you say, look, we have to part ways. Versus, you know...
And I'm giving a very shallow...
Yeah, well, we're not talking about specifics here. We have to be broad, so that makes sense.
Then this church itself then got split up. The first split happened with the head that was in Rome, quoting the fact that Paul was handed the keys to the city. And he said that he was the head of the entire church, and the rest of the church said, no, you're not. So there was a split there. This later got known as the Roman Catholic Church, which was very well needed for the time when it first got started because they held on to a lot of records that would have been destroyed otherwise. Matter of fact, the Bible that we know today is because they were able to hold on to those records and combine them into one book.
The only problem, I'm not going to say the only problem. Good things come, bad things come as well.
Yeah.
And in my notes, I was talking about how you've got a compromising with paganism, which changed a lot of the doctrines and the intent of the church at large. I am never going to go after individuals unless... I mean, we've already talked about Joel Osteen, so there's...
I went after him.
There's a difference with
Come
that.
at me, Joel Osteen.
I mean...
No. But like I'm talking about the Roman Catholic Church, the higher ups throughout history, the history that we cannot deny. The intent of the church is we will convert you by conquering you. You know, there's a big thing with that. You have the infighting. How there were 3 popes at one time that all discommunicated each other. I love that. That is one of my favorite bits from history. That's hilarious. In my opinion. You've got, of course, the attempts to break away from those wrong influences, which still caused intense fracturing, which is a good and bad thing, but that's how you get Protestantism. That's how you get all of the different denominations that we have today. And, yes, I know. Jordan will be talking about that later.
I'm waiting.
She's biding her time.
I'm waiting.
But it's to this point where without God's help, we will not be able to replicate the true unity felt by the infant church. Until Jesus comes again.
So could we all agree that the real beginning of this change within the church was the second that we realized as human beings that we had free will to change whatever it is that we wanted to change after Christ left?
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It was an epiphany that I just had just now. I was like, whoa!
I mean, that gets really hit home further down the line. In America, because the church was the central of all communities.
Was.
Mm-hmm. They started losing their power, and they started preaching what's known as the social gospel. Mm-hmm. It's very similar to prosperity gospel, but that's where you start getting some people who take the core foundations, and that's where gap theory came from, and you got stuff like that.
It's Caroline again. Thanks so much for listening to Call to the Table.
This is where I normally would tell you about our awesome sponsors, but we still don't have any. If you would like to remedy that situation, please get in touch with us at calltothetable@gmail.com. I've got some super awesome announcements for you. We are now on Anchor, Spotify, and Google Play. iTunes is coming up soon, so please, please, please look for updates from us on that on our Facebook and Instagram. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Bye, guys!
I was at a church where a person got fired because they said that if the church needed to move in a direction, then the congregation should also have the same feeling that the leadership should have.
Oh.
And this was somebody that got brought over from his home in England to the United States, and all of a sudden now was out on, no family, no nothing. Well, he had a family, but it was his wife and kids. And the church just went, nope, you're fired, bye.
Well, I think it really does, that kind of just continues to show how the church has changed, because we go from a singular root of this is what Christ taught, and then it spreads out here and there, and through that time it also changes the way we view Christian faith. We can have massive opinions and completely different opinions about what the Bible says depending on what translation we're listening to or we're reading, and whatever the pastor's teaching us. And my view might be one thing, and y'all's view might be something completely different. And that just goes to show, there's where the church has also changed. Is the teachings. Some people aren't teaching the exact same stuff from the Bible, or they are teaching it, but we're receiving it differently. And so then the congregation is receiving what the teaching is saying, and we're moving forward in that.
Or there's a faulty translation.
Which
is why I love going to the concordances. It's the best thing.
Well, and I know I'm not, and I'm a little bit more ignorant on this topic, so if I say it wrong, I apologize. I am not a 7-day, what's it?
Seventh-day
Adventist.
I don't see the seventh day as Saturday. I respect it. I was taught that the seventh day was Saturday, but I was also taught that the seventh day was Sunday. Through my upbringing, through Sunday was the Sabbath.
Through half Catholic, half Baptist upbringing.
Yeah.
Which was funny because never, even in the Catholic faith, did they say that the Sabbath got moved to Sunday. They just started worshiping on Sunday.
Exactly.
But we don't want this to be a...
Yeah.
We can talk about this later. We're sticking with the church thing.
Yeah. But at the Baptist church, I was never taught that Saturday was a Sabbath day. I was taught that Sunday was a Sabbath day. And I grew up in the Baptist church with just a knowledge and an understanding of a Catholic other half. We do celebrate certain Catholic traditions. We do kind of follow through with that. My dad and my grandmother do go to Mass and invite us every week. I grew up in the Baptist church. I now consider myself a non-denominational, I'm just follower of Christ. I do not label myself. But I never really knew that there were people who worshipped on Saturday because that was the Sabbath.
Aside from Jews.
I didn't know there was anyone outside of until I knew you guys did. You guys go to those churches, because I grew up in a church that said Sunday was the Sabbath.
And I, honestly, this is going to be awful, but when I was a kid, it wasn't until, I was in kindergarten that I realized other people went to church on different days, and I was like, what?
Yeah. And I knew people went to church on different days because they have Saturday service and Sunday service and Wednesday service. Some people have Friday services, but that just shows more change within the church, as we can't even be cohesive on a day. We can't be cohesive on a day.
I'm going to hit on something you said, which this is going to be my rant. I feel like I have two kind of things of what caused the difference between the church now and the church then. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is that...
It's okay.
I think
do you love hearing her knuckles, guys?
I can't help it. At least it's not my back or my hips.
Oh, gosh.
At least it's not my hips or my back. Okay?
But I feel like, we touched on this when we said what the purpose was originally. It was a community. It was to sit there and train and send out people.
Yeah.
we've lost that, and our egos have come into play.
Absolutely.
We now are more focused on who's right
Yeah.
and who is preaching the correct version or the
Yes.
correct
Doctrine.
translation or the correct doctrine. We have lost touch with the fact that we are followers of Christ, and that is all Christ asked us to be. He didn't.
Yeah.
There is at no point in the Bible where God sits there and says, I want you to split up, make denominations, and argue amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
That was not his purpose. He said, I want you to go and spread my word and spread the gospel.
Yeah.
That literally was the entire form of the church. That's all they were told to do, was go and spread the gospel and God's love. That's it.
Yeah.
And we have totally lost that. We get into, and I'm not saying that, we get in our discussions together, we just got into one where we get into technicalities, and I'm not sitting here and saying we shouldn't do that, but I feel like we should be able to come back and say, we believe, for me and Caroline, Saturday is the Sabbath. Liv believes that, Sunday's the Sabbath. John's...
And we can come together and
I'm
talk
weird.
about why we believe those
Yeah,
things.
but at the end of the day, there's not a hatred, there's
Absolutely.
not a
Heavens,
hostility between the four of us.
Right.
No.
Because we understand
Absolutely.
we're Christians at the very, very base of it.
Right.
That's a huge thing that we've lost.
Absolutely.
And whew,
It is a huge thing we've lost because, yeah.
if you look me up, I do not have a denomination. I don't even say I'm non-denominational. I just say I'm Christian.
Yeah,
talk-
Because that's what I am.
Follower of
Talk
Christ.
about your background a little bit.
I grew
why.
up in a Seventh-day Adventist home.
Well, I just meant like the way
Yeah.
your family kind of.
Well, so my grandparents, hey grandma and grandpa, my grandparents,
Like they're going to listen.
no, they don't have the technology too, but hey,
My grandma's going to listen to this. She
hey,
already
Liv's
told me.
grandma. No, I grew up with them and I'm not going to say legalistic, but they grew up more traditional Seventh-day Adventist where you didn't have.
No. Our church went through a horrific period of just like disgusting legalism. Like seriously, we're going to talk about that.
You. I was. At
I mean
Fayette.
the church at large.
Oh, I
like
see what you're saying.
like the 50s.
Yeah.
were some of the most screwed up times of my denomination.
Shush. Anyway, so my grandparents were very much of the opinion that Sabbath, you didn't go shopping, you didn't go out to eat, you didn't turn on the TV. It was your time to connect with God. Not necessarily a bad thing, but because it was cool, I got to go walking with my grandfather, and that's memories that I have now with him that, I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had that. But my parents were very much of the opinion of it's a time for, family, and it's a time to go and do stuff. So we would go do different things, like with my parents of going out to eat or something like that. We still have, and I still carry this, that I don't work on Sabbath. Mm-hmm. But for me, that was I went to Christian schools my whole life that were based on Baptist teaching. I had Seventh-day Adventist, family. We bounced churches, and that was something that I had to come to terms with. Was my grandparents tended to be more judgmental to people who didn't agree with everything that went with the legalistic whatever, and that for me, I couldn't stand that judgment. I couldn't stand walking out of church and feeling like crap because I wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. And that was something that in college, I went to a public college, that I found more acceptance and more love and more, honestly, Christ-like people at a public secular college from non-believers than from the people that were in my own church. And that was a big eye-opener for me. I had to sit there and be like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to sit there and somebody who has tattoos, who has green hair, who has, piercings all over, I'm not going to sit there and say God's not going to love that person.
Right.
The church may. I'm not.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a big thing for me.
And that's where I currently, and again, this is my opinion, and it's where I sit in. That's currently what I have an issue with as far as the church. I currently listen to sermons and watch podcasts, or listen to podcasts, watch sermons and stuff on my time, but I don't go to a church because I know the looks that I get.
Yeah.
Because not only do I have tattoos, but I dress a little bit less than traditional female clothing. Like I'm
more
wearing,
casual.
Tomboyish.
Yeah, very, very tomboy-esque. Hoodies and athletic wear and sneakers, and I have short hair and I dye it all the time. And I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end
Yep.
of the assumptions that church gives. And it's not pleasant, and it's not fun, and it's ridiculous to walk into a church or a church functioning location, and immediately be scrutinized
Yep.
for my external appearance, not knowing where my heart is. And that's why my opinions of church are so, I don't want to say they're super negative, but they come across as super negative because my appearance in church is usually what the elders turn their nose up to.
Yep.
And it's ridiculous.
Yep.
And I don't want to associate myself with a church that can't accept anyone who walks through those doors.
Yep. But I think the other part of it, too, this is kind of the other notes. I think the other thing that caused that change was, and we kind of touched on this with the arts, the arts in the Christian field. At the time after Christ had come, and Caroline, you kind of touched on this, too, there was a huge momentum. Christ had just been there. They wanted it back as quickly as possible. Yeah. So there's this huge momentum. Well, the more he didn't come and the more years went by, that momentum kind of slows down. The community and the connection kind of starts dividing. And now, especially, we have technology that comes into play where we are distracted. Mm-hmm. And we literally, if we wanted to, could turn off and not hear anything about the Christian community.
This is something that I wrote about in my notes.
Yeah.
The rise of individualism, which is not a bad thing.
No,
it's
not at all.
It's just that we are now lacking balance severely, where people are so... I mean, there are people out there who are physically touch-starved because there are not enough people actually physically in their life, you know. That we have gotten so individual. It's so much harder to reach people who just don't want to be reached because they're not willing to listen to anyone who's not already agreeing with their own point of view. And that can be said for people who are already within the church who, you know, that they think they know all of that and they're not willing to grow any further. I want to share this because this was something really cool that some random dude came to our church years and years ago, and I have never forgotten what he said since. He said there are 4 levels of faith. You've got the Hells Angels, who, not necessarily that they're awful, you know, whatever, or that they're stereotypical bikers or whatever, but they're just people who are not in the church. They don't know about God. Right. They, you know, all that stuff. And then you have the, it's not institutionalist, I'm just going to call it that anyway. You have those people who they are now in the church. They sort of, I'm not going to say they know the rules, but you know what I mean. And some people never rise above this, where they're just in church, they know how it goes, they know what they're supposed to believe.
It's routine.
They don't know any further, and some of them don't want to know any further. Then you have the questioners. Notice how they are above the institutionalists. And they're the ones who are saying, okay, but what I have been told is not enough. I want to go further. Why doesn't this make sense? Why doesn't, you know, all of this? And then you have the last level of faith, which is just straight up faith. They are questioners who have said, okay, I have gotten what I can get. Some things I'm just going to have to take on faith, but I want to still continue my walk.
Right.
This is the clincher. People can only minister to people below them and not above. You have institutionalists who are trying to minister to questioners, and they're teaching the questioners like they're Hell's Angels, because they can only minister to Hell's Angels. Right. Even though they may be questioning, which means they're technically above the institutionalist. So that's, I would say, a big problem with those who are in the church, trying to reach out to those who are out of the church. I'm going to call on you, young lady, and then you gentlemen in the red.
Well, I could sit here and say, then that makes total sense and I'm calling them out. A lot of pastors.
Yeah.
Because a lot of pastors have a lot of head knowledge, and they're stuck in that head knowledge, and they don't question anything, and they don't actually have that true faith, which bugs me. Like, I sit here, and I don't know the Bible front and back. People assume that I know the Bible front and back. I don't know the Bible front and back. I know what God has given me, and I know what I have studied. That's not a lot. I am not the most knowledgeable person in the entire universe. Nope. However, I like to think that I have a great deal of faith, and I question the Lord, and I ask him all these questions, and I move forward in learning. And yet I go to a church where someone who probably... I went to a church where someone was not the best man to stand up there and say, this is faith. I went to a dance company where I sat and had to listen to a man for 3 years tell me, this is faith. And yet nothing that came out of his mouth was anything questionable or faith-based. Like...
Yes, John.
Barely suppressed rage. Okay.
Just very, very
Well, going off of what you were saying, looking at Hebrews 5, if you look at the very end of Hebrews 5, it talks about the believers that drink milk eventually
Yeah.
building up to eating meat.
Yes.
Because the goal is for the believer to eat the meat
Yeah.
to build strong and healthy bodies.
Right.
But as a babe, you need to be, and yes, I'm using babe as in what they said there. As a babe, you drink milk.
Oh, you're not talking about the magical pig?
Aww.
Aww. No. That'll do, pig. Anyways.
Like,
But
hate that movie.
I don't think I've actually
Hate
watched
that
it.
movie.
But anyway,
I'm sorry.
I'm staring Liv down just so you guys know.
I also don't like the movie Jaws, okay? I think it's awful.
No, I can get that.
Babe, Jaws, Bambi, Dumbo, I hate all those movies.
we
Frozen.
love you anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
We love you
Yeah.
despite your
It's okay.
shortcomings.
Yeah.
You love me even though I'm wrong.
But this, again, that's part of the purpose of the church, is to take you from drinking milk to eating meat, or from being an institutionalist to being...
I mean,
faith-based.
questioner is also fine. You just don't want to stay in questioner for you
Well,
don't want to
that-
stay a questioner perpetually without having faith.
Right, that
'Cause
just
faith
reminds
still
me
questions.
of, non-believers, cold Christian faith, lukewarm Christian faith, and on fire Christian faith. That's what that makes me think of, hardcore. If you're lukewarm, you're still not... You're warming up, but you're still not fully there.
It's
And
one of the
that's-
worst places to be, actually.
And that's
It
what
is.
Jesus says to the
Be-
church of Laodicea. You are neither hot nor cold, therefore I will spew you out of my mouth.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this goes into... I'm going to go whoop like that. I'm going to make kind of a roundabout. Or a U-turn.
Going British.
I think a lot of Liv, going off of what you were talking about, pastors that are, standing up at the front and they're institutionalists
Yeah.
and they're not questioners. I think that kind of goes into how we are training pastors. You have to look at the
Yeah.
original pastors in the Acts church. It was Paul. It was Peter. These guys were not trained.
No, they have
In-
faith
well-
in...
They were trained by Jesus.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Jesus didn't sit there and say, you have to know the New Testament or not the New Testament, but
No.
the Old Testament front to back. That was not his focus. His was, do
Paul
you know
would've,
the
though.
main message?
Right.
Well, I mean, Paul also was
But
Saul
that's-
and used it for killing.
That's not necessarily the point I was trying to make, though. The point I was trying to make was they can have as much head knowledge as humanly possible, but if they don't show the faith, or they are not, I don't care. Honestly, to be completely honest with you, I've had my students be a better pastor to me sometimes, because they, the Lord has spoken through them so quickly, where I'm like, yes, and they have zero, no
No.
offense to my students, but they don't have the same kind of training as,
That's what I'm saying.
yeah,
Is,
I'm agreeing with you.
yeah, that's it, where I think our education system and I'm not saying necessarily anything against the education system. It's just
I
how,
am.
It's just how we are. But we are so focused on the head
Okay.
knowledge. We don't encourage
Exactly.
even for me I'm working with younger kids. We already are squashing the idea of asking questions why.
Right.
The more we squash that, the less likely we are to become, questioners or on fire or whatever, because
Right.
we're being told to take it and to just suck it up.
Yep.
And so when you have a group like the four of us who sit there and go, we're not okay with that, what happens? We end up starting a podcast. Thank you for joining us. But no, I mean, that's what this started, was we all
Yeah.
would get into conversations and be questioning stuff. And so I think that has a lot to do with how we're training pastors. We're not allowing them to ask why.
Because that should be
Right.
institutionalized.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what is causing a huge rift in our faith. Just in general. If we can't put our faith in our pastors, how are we supposed to put our faith in a God we can't see?
Yeah.
You know, that's what I hear so many times is if I can't trust my pastor, how am I supposed to trust my father?
Yeah, the person that they're talking about.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that also has to deal with, I mean, the family unit has never been perfect, but the fact that in our world, the lack of community, even amongst families, how people are so spread out, or we also have families where we're missing a or both parents.
Yep.
It is difficult for people to understand having a relationship with God when they don't have the full picture of Him through the parental figures.
I completely agree with you.
I mean, nothing for you, John, but I sometimes have trouble understanding men because
Absolutely.
I have sometimes trouble understanding John, so you're fine.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking
We
about...
all have trouble understanding John.
I mean, let's just be honest. I'm a very weird and ununderstandable person.
I know, but like,
You're not an understander.
men in general...
Ununderstandable.
Yeah, okay.
A dad in general, because my dad was not the dad that I wanted. Like, even when he was still with us, like, I get him more now as an adult than when I did as a kid. But
Absolutely.
that has definitely not helped me understand God from that sort of growing up childhood father perspective.
Absolutely.
And so I can see people who do not have that looking up to other father figures, which would be pastors.
Right.
And so it's like, I'm looking for a human father figure. This is not helping me discover who God is.
Right.
And that makes the leap from straight to an invisible deity that much harder, because it's like, what do
Absolutely.
I base you on?
Which if I'm saying this to the podcast, if you listen to the previous podcast about communication and conflict, which leads me back to my question originally. What was my question originally? I just had it. Communication.
There you go.
Yay.
Would you say that God then communicated to you in a specific way to then reach you?
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I've not...
You said
I have had father figures in my life.
Absolutely.
They have not been as long-lived as I would like.
Right.
But I was lucky enough that when I was really getting involved in the church of my childhood, which is still the church that I attend, we had an excellent pastor who was so outgoing, so friendly, a true father figure. I had him to look up to. I'm trying to think who else. I've had some professors, some college professors, who are walking around like a little duckling going, Daddy, Daddy, I love you. And I don't mean that in a creepy way, listeners. So, anyway.
Remove the physical father figure out of the picture. Has God reached out to you in other ways to prove himself as a trustworthy, like, father in your life? Removing the father figures.
Right. No. Can you give me, like, more specific what you're fishing for?
Has there been a time where God communicated with you, whether verbally or non-verbally, where you were like, that's my father. That right there is my father, is Abba, is Yahweh, is the one who created me and gave me a beginning and an end, and a start and a finish, and a purpose in my life.
Like,
I would say, no, I think I get it. For me, because I love intellectualism so much, and I get that from both of my parents, when I really am able to get into the Bible and other theological works, I thrive off of facts and getting into those nitty-gritty details that, to me, flesh out the big picture, because sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. That's the approach that I like to take to the Bible, because I feel like most people come to the Bible and say, oh, well, it's a book of fairy tales. They aren't able to come to it and see, this is where it's historically grounded. This is the extra cool stuff that shows yes, this was supernaturally done, but it's never done in a way that's fairy tale-esque. You know, it is so different from all of the other world mythologies,
Right.
just in the way that God operates.
Right.
My favorite moments in the Bible have been where God face-to-face talks to someone in a very intimate manner. And I'm
Right.
not just talking about within the New Testament, although I will say my favorite part in the New Testament is Jesus and Nicodemus.
Right.
Because it is that one-on-one thing.
Absolutely.
Two of my favorite examples are God and Moses on the mountain.
Yep.
Not just in those 40 days, but where Moses sort of blurts out, "Show me your glory."
Yep.
And then we have God saying, "Okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to hide you in a cleft right over here. I will put my hand over you,
Yep.
my physical hand. And then as I go in front of you, I'll remove it and you will see the back of my 100% pure energy infused physical form." You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, and as he did it, he proclaimed who he was before Moses. He
Right.
was proclaiming who he was and showing who he was. And that was just, to me, absolutely incredible. And then my next favorite one is Elijah on Mount Sinai
Yeah.
again. And we have, he just had his huge thing with Mount Carmel
Right.
and this huge victory. But sometimes when we have a huge victory, that's when we are also weak. And Jezebel's like, "I'm gonna come kill you." And he's like, "Oh, crap."
Right.
And so he flees. He has his own 40-day journey through
Yeah.
the wilderness where he is supernaturally sustained. And then when he meets God on the mountain in the little cave, he has a hissy fit. And he has this whole spiel about how he's the last prophet and he's the only one who's upholding God's name and blah, 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 blah. And then God comes to him in several different ways. We've got the fire, we've got the earthquake, we've got the
Yep.
wind. But God was not in any of those. He is in a still small voice that beckons Elijah to
Right.
come out of the cave.
Right.
And then what's funny is that Elijah has the same exact rant, but in my mind he says it more calmly.
Yeah.
He says it with, "This is where I am."
Yeah.
And God gives him his answer. That's why Job is my favorite book of the Bible, because
Yeah.
God just
Darn
straight
too.
out,
Yeah.
God just, I mean, he just goes all out, you know? And so it's those intimate moments because I treasure intimacy.
Right.
I treasure that one-on-one showing me something very special. So am I answering your
You
question?
answered my question to a T. Now I have another question.
Yay!
Is that something that you could have learned in the church? Or is that something that you had to learn on your own? That God communicated intimately with you? Or did he communicate all of that through a pastor?
So when we talk about the church, I'm going to say this. I have learned more in Sabbath school, which is Sunday school for everybody else,
Okay.
than I have sometimes in a church service.
Okay.
I have learned, there have been pastors who have spoken,
Right.
and when I say spoken beautifully, I mean,
Passionately.
and it's not just passionately, it's logically.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
have, you can see their relationship with
Right.
God based on how they talk, the amount of research that they go through.
Right.
And those pastors have been some that I have seen on TV, as well as a few that I have been blessed with throughout my life.
Right.
I would not say that that has been a consistent thing
Okay.
in my life, but it can happen.
Yeah,
But I don't
I
believe
completely
people
agree.
should. I mean, I know we're talking about the purpose of church and how we want things to change.
Yeah.
But people should not expect to go into church and be fed solely by a pastor because he is going to disappoint you at one point. He
Why?
or she.
Well, that's not even
Because they're
that's not even
human.
structure.
Exactly. And that's one of the issues I have with the church is we don't allow the Holy Spirit to saturate the space. We put our human, like you said, egos in the way.
Yep.
And now we have issues within the church.
Yep.
That was the point I was kind of, and I don't know if it made sense or if like just
No,
listening
it
made
did.
sense.
It did. I
But
just
getting
wanted
to a
to-
point of like,
I was just like, you have a point. Where are we going with this?
no,
I
no,
wanna
no,
make
yeah,
sure.
yeah, I love it.
Okay.
Because it's one of the things that I share a lot about my personal walk is God speaks to me in such different ways than through people. He speaks to me through people, don't get me wrong, but he speaks to me in a different kind of way where it's not necessarily through the mouth of another individual. It's through that still small voice or through pulling me out of, the depths of valley or something, different. It's all these like things that he does for me that does not involve another human. So what I was trying to get at necessarily was that father figure that he can become. He doesn't have to, you were saying like some people don't have that father figure in their life so they can have that clear depiction of God. Sometimes you don't need that. You just took me through this wonderful journey of how you see God as your father and you see him as your Abba, and none of that had a person attached to it.
Right.
All of that was him the whole time.
Yeah.
So like it was kind of to like not disprove your theory, but also like prove to you like you didn't need.
No, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, and
we're just talking about multiple ways that people do
absolutely
it,
right.
but
and
that was a new way of thinking about it, and that was cool.
Yeah, hopefully it's encouraging to those who are listening that don't have a father
Hi,
or
guys.
maybe don't have a mom who are like, I don't know if I could have faith in God because my father left, or because of, my father passed away, or because my mother left, or because,
or my father beat me, or
exactly,
Oh,
or I
mercy.
was sexually assaulted. You just told this wonderful story about how God proved that he is your father without even having to have that physical father figure in your life. And it's just, I think it's super cool. And that's like completely off topic, but kind of not. But it's just like,
Liv is all happy.
Fun. This was
I
fun.
love that kind of stuff.
She's in her happy
she
place.
has the feels right now.
That's where I
field.
thrive, because that's who God is. He finds those smaller places, and it's like, that's God. That's him. And we've taken that out of the church, and that's why we don't have a sound church right now.
And I think, for each of us, for Caroline, she connects with God through and sees that Abba figure through the intellectual and that one-on-one relationship. For me, because I carry the weight of the world on my shoulders because of how my personality is, that's a big reason why I like going to the beach so much, because you look out at everything.
Absolutely.
And there's no way in my head that somebody who created something that beautiful, that big, can't take on the stuff that I have.
Absolutely.
So yours is through nature.
Yeah.
I just
mine
wanted
is,
to like specify that.
mine is through, but like specific forms of nature to where like
Ocean.
Well, it's not just that, because I mean I've gone out in our backyard before and been like, oh my goodness, with the wide open. But if the more confined I am, so like if you put me in woods and stuff like that, the more confined I feel. Whereas the more open it is in a field, at my parents' house, there's their house is no trees.
Yeah.
So that was a place when I would start feeling upset. I would go walk because it's big and it's open and it releases all that tension and all that stress that's bottled.
That makes things make so much more sense.
That's part of the reason why I like the mountains, because you can look over.
Yeah.
Right. See, and I like the intimacy of the woods. I like that closeness.
But I
don't like being outside.
And then we have Liv.
I don't like being outside.
See, I'm the only person in this group I think that likes going camping in a tent.
No, thank
I
you.
would be willing to try it in the right,
But
way.
for you, that's your
Not
thing.
me.
For you, that's your
Yeah.
thing. You've loved camping. You always have. And that's a big
we
way
got
for
the
you.
Eagle Scout over here.
Well, no. Was it last year when you went, when it was snowing?
It was
Ew, ugh.
It was okay.
Why?
It was 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
So it'd be 2008. No,
2018. You're right.
yeah, 2018.
John came to me and said, I'm feeling, no, it wasn't lost, but he was like, I need to go camping. And it was, I mean, now looking back, it was God calling him.
Absolutely.
And I just started, quick little story time with John. I got leaving to go down there late. It had snowed earlier that week, and there was still snow on the
enemy
mountain.
was trying to keep you away.
It got down into
Evil
the
man.
teens that night.
Yeah.
So that means I got late to my campsite. It was dark, so I'm having to try to set up a tent in the dark, trying to light a fire in the dark. Didn't get the fires going. Luckily,
Oh, Lord.
This sounds really bad,
but while I was hiking up there, I did take time to call Jordan, and I was just talking about the magnificence of the sunset, how calm everything was.
Yep.
Because all this stuff, no matter what, is going to work. And as it says in the Bible, God feeds the birds. He clothes the flowers. How much more significant are you?
Yep.
So, as we are sort of reaching our time limit, do we want to ask the last question about what can we do to start changing the purpose of church? Which to me is like, I looked at it and I was like, I don't know what to say.
I have an answer.
I do too. Go ahead, Liv.
Go guys. Go guys.
My best opinion, the way we could change the purpose of church, and really bring it back to, good stuff, is we need leaders that find Christ in these moments, that find their connection with God in moments like these, where you all, y'all all have like nature or intellectual different things. Mine's creation. Mine is creating pieces, being a part of the creation of a piece, creating artwork, even though I'm colorblind, which stinks.
You are?
Yeah, I'm red-green colorblind. It's glorious. I don't see shades.
So
Liv.
Christmas is wonderful for you.
No.
So difficult.
So shout out if the person of these lovely TikToks is listening to this. There is this poor dear man who is also red-green colorblind.
It's awful.
And he tries to sort M&Ms. And he gets down to red and green.
Okay.
And it is the funniest
Let me specify,
thing
though.
ever.
I don't see shades of colors.
Yeah, that's
so
how my brother
red-green
is.
colorblind is when you don't see the certain pigments of like reds and certain pigments of the greens.
He just can't see
He's
red.
he's completely colorblind,
like
which is a form of red-green.
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, he it is specifically red green. He can
Yeah.
get the others, but like he'll get a pile of just red and green, and he's like,
Right.
oh boy.
There's like
Oh,
4
boy.
or 5 different versions of red-green, and shades of one is the one David is also red-green colorblind.
Oh,
I'm
my
telling you,
word.
that is
So-
why
What
y'all
the heck?
belong
Wait
together.
a minute, and we have him in charge of doing the official logo.
He can see colors. Again, it's shades of colors. We
know.
have a hard time with these shades of colors. So if there are multiple shades, like I only see red.
I'm sorry,
I don't
David,
usually
we're ragging on
see
you.
red and pinks. Like last night when you guys were like, "Oh, it's the red one."
The red, orange, yellowish.
no.
Yeah, I did not. I just
whitish.
guessed.
I'm so sorry.
I
Okay.
genuinely just was like, I'm gonna guess which one it is because I'm just gonna pick a word because I don't really care at this point.
Well, now we know.
Now you
Yes.
know. But for
Now we know
me,
to say this.
it-
This from the top. This from the bottom.
Yeah.
We're learning things about ourselves in this podcast, guys.
Yeah. But for me, it's creating, it's doing art projects, it's drawing, it's finding those beautiful moments that connects me to God. This is how He probably felt when He created the heavens and the earth. This is probably how He felt when He created the movement of the winds and the movement of the trees. Like that's how I feel when I choreograph and when I dance and when I do art and when I do things like this.
That's so
we need more
pretty.
leaders in the church that connect with God in natural ways,
Yeah.
not these authentic, what's the word I'm looking for?
Artificial.
Inauthentic, artificial, watered down, book smart leaders. As
Yep.
much as we need them, but we need leaders who are fully connected in the faith, who are attached to the Holy Spirit in all ways, and will move when He says move, and will stop when He says stop, and will speak when He says speak, and will shut up when He says do not open your mouth. Because that's another issue we have. Is we have pastors who will speak and say things, and that's fine. But when the Holy Spirit is like, do not say this, they do it anyways. And it makes me very upset. It's not right. So having leaders in the church that are one with the Holy Spirit, who are connected to Him, and really allowing the Holy Spirit to saturate.
For me, I had, obviously, because denominations is such a big thing for me, breaking down the walls of instead of sitting there and finding differences
Yeah.
and finding things to hate each other on,
Yeah.
is finding similarities and finding things
Yeah.
that we can bond over. But at the same time, I think, and I'm not disagreeing that we need to have leaders in the church. We do. That is specifically Jesus preached that we
Absolutely.
need to have leaders in the church. That does not mean that the rest of the congregation gets to sit on their butts.
Preach.
We need to understand that if we are coming to church and it doesn't matter what part we are always learning, we're always growing,
Yeah.
and we should always be teaching.
Yes.
There's always people below us
yes.
that we're in, as much as we grow, we're never better than anybody, and the leaders are never better than anybody. They just happen to be called for that, hopefully.
Right.
But yeah, refocusing, instead of church being something you do because it's tradition or because it's routine or because of, whatever excuse you give, refocusing that to having a reason why you're going. Am I going to learn?
Absolutely.
Am I going to check on somebody that I
Right.
know is not doing well? Am I going because You're serving in the church. Why are you going? Having an actual specific reason, and not just, well, I go because my parents go, or I go because it's tradition, or I go because it's just what a good Southern girl does.
Right.
Like,
A good Southern girl.
well, and that's honestly here, especially in the South, that's a reason given.
I know.
Because it's just
I
what a
know.
Southern woman or a
Yep.
Southern man does. You go to church.
Well, and I
mean-
think you were about to hit on it, and it was really profound. Is the church is not just a leader.
Yes.
It is a church is a community.
Yes.
We need to stop acting like the church is
Yes.
one man's building, and we need to continue
Yes.
acting like it is a communal building.
Yes.
Well, and this kind of goes into what I was going to say.
You're
We need to
welcome.
decentralize the church.
Yes.
Because if you look at it, it was the leaders of the church that were leading the groups. Now we have a pastor, a board of elders that outside of the preaching and decisions behind the scenes don't have much to do with the congregation.
Yeah.
What we need is for the leaders of the church to be your Sabbath or Sunday school teachers, to be your
Yes.
small group leaders.
Yep.
And we are supposed to praise God and learn about Him every day. One thing I did like about a church that me, Olivia, and Jordan went to is that they did do small groups that did meet on
Every day. of the
any
week.
day of the week.
Yep.
Yep.
And I like that a lot because, yes, you are supposed to take a specific day to honor God,
Right.
but you're also supposed to honor Him every day.
Your actions should be
Amen.
speaking through, and how you live should be speaking through how your walk is with God.
Again, it's keeping the walk and the talk in line. That you're not
Absolutely.
talking it and not walking it at the same
And
time.
going back to the early church, you wouldn't have had a preacher. Your preachers were the ones that were traveling around, like Paul,
Peter,
Timothy,
yep.
and all of them.
And everyone was preaching in the church. If they
Yeah.
had a testimony, they got it and they spoke it.
Yep.
You know, and I'll tell you something that's been bothering me. I was just thinking this last Saturday as I was sitting in church. I don't know half of these people.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
know some of them, but I don't know everybody. That this is not a community.
No.
Right.
We're supposed to be togetherness.
Right.
And I mean, there's a part of me that's like, why can't we just have small towns where everybody knows everybody else's business? And, you know, it's like, yeah, not that I'm fishing for gossip or anything, but it's like we're just lacking that cheers where everybody knows your name.
That's why I hate mega churches.
Amen. But I'm saying this in small churches.
Oh yeah, it's in small churches too. But like that's one of the reasons I will never step through the doors of a mega church is because
Yeah.
There's no.
how am I supposed to know all those people? I'm not gonna.
I
not when the whole
particularly felt
city
that
of Houston goes there.
I felt that at like my university church because
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, I realize it's heckin' big because we have a gigantic amount of kids, you know, but at the same time it's like, I'm just coming in here. Nobody would notice if I left or wasn't here.
I didn't know who the elders were at the church we went to. Did you guys know who the elders were?
I only knew the ones that we voted in the time that we were there.
I didn't even know who they were.
No.
Like, let's be real. I did not know what any of those elders looked like.
The guy that was in charge of the offering was one of them.
I don't remember what he looked like.
The reason why I know him because I got pulled a lot of times to the offering.
Well, you're tall.
Oh.
When you're short, you don't get asked to do these
You
things.
can move back just a little bit.
No, you want me close. It's fine. I know you
But
do.
I mean-
No tiny dancer. I don't want to hold you closer. Get further back.
But I mean, that's what I was saying. They
Yeah.
made decisions behind the scenes,
Yep.
which right now one of the elders is the preacher of that church.
Yep.
Just in case you didn't know that bit of information.
Oh, I did, but it doesn't make me happy.
No, but this was
even
one of the
first.
things. This was one of the things that solidified the church that John and I go to now. Was you visited twice, and on the second time you came, our pastor looked at you, said your name, knew who you were, and was proud of himself for remembering it.
That's dope.
Yeah.
Now, given
That was a big
That's dope.
thing for me, was the fact that she came once, and the
Yep.
second time he looked at her and was like, "You're Jordan's friend, right? Your name's Caroline, right?" Like, I mean,
Yep.
and when we were like, "Oh yeah," he was like, "I'm so proud." Like,
Well,
and
I
in
can
all
tell you
fairness,
right
we were
now-
at a satellite of a bigger church.
But it doesn't matter.
Still, he knew her name.
Mm-hmm.
And he remembered who she came with.
And I can tell you right now, the former pastor of the church we went to does not and did not know who I was. And I was one of the youth leaders. And I ran a dance program.
I will say, at least our current, like, for me, like, if you are active in things, they do know who you are. But, like, I still want to have that community where everybody feels that same sense of oneness and unity. And not just with the select few people who are busy doing junk. You know what I mean?
I get you. And I agree with you 100% because it's the people who join the church who don't have an outlet yet, who don't know where they want to put themselves within the church, who feel like there's no community because everyone, and I'm not saying that your church does this. I've never been to your church, but the churches I've been to, I would go and I would try them out, and there would be smaller churches, but no one would take the time of day to shake my hand and say, "Good morning, how are you?"
Yep.
I would have to do it as a new person.
Trust me, you would get that.
And I completely believe you.
There is I'm just
Don't
not
say it.
No,
I'm saying,
I won't say her name, but she would grab you and like forcefully shake your hand.
But that's one person.
And that's one church. I'm saying, why doesn't, like, I know Southern Baptist churches do like the shake your hand to the neighbor to your right.
Nobody wants to do that. No.
I don't want to be prompted to. I want the community as a whole to feel like a community. But I'm going off into a different topic. So.
I believe that's about all we can really cover on this subject for today.
I agree with that.
We're dangerously close to our.
Well, not only that, but we keep diverting on these little out trails.
Oh, rabbit trails.
We've come
are
up
fun.
with like 5 more topics. Just saying. I'm keeping notes in my head.
Good.
All right, John, lead us out.
This has been another episode of Called to the Table. We would love to hear from you, questions, comments, or prayer requests. And please get in touch with us at Called to the Table Pod on both Facebook and Instagram, or calledtothetable@gmail.com.
I love your radio voice. I'm going to talk really passionately. This has been Called to the Table.
Some of us gotta have more than one voice.
I'm going to be authentic to myself and be myself the whole time.